My name is Silas Donnelly, and I am 44 years old. I stand here now, in the brightly lit lobby of a bank I never imagined I would set foot in again, feeling the weight of every moment that led me back to this place. Behind me, a line of customers shifts impatiently, some tapping their shoes, others checking phones, many glancing at the closed doors of the teller windows. I clutch a withdrawal slip in my hand, the crisp paper folded twice so it fits neatly into my worn leather wallet. $150. Just enough to help someone who mattered more than pride or bitterness. I've rehearsed this moment a dozen times on the drive here, how I would ask politely, how I would ignore the shock on her face, how I would walk away without giving her the satisfaction of seeing me break. But rehearsals never capture the tangibility of loss, the sharpness of a memory that festers in your chest like a stone. Her face is the first thing I notice when I step forward. Marla. My ex-wife, once the center of my universe, now a branch manager at Lyndale Federal Bank. I hadn't seen her in 4 years. Not since she packed a single suitcase and uttered the words, "You'll never be enough for me," before walking out of the house I paid for, leaving behind empty rooms and an echoing silence. I remember the way the door clicked shut, how the hallway seemed to contract, how every photograph on the wall felt like a lie. Back then, I might have followed her, begged her to stay, pleaded for another chance. But that was the old me, a man defined by someone else's approval. The new me has relearned what it means to stand on my own 2 feet, but I didn't anticipate how seeing her here, behind the counter, would slam that old wound wide open. She registers me immediately, a flicker in her eyes, a slight tilt of her chin, and then the smirk. That same expression she wore on our wedding day when she teased me in front of my family, making me feel small, even as I held her hand at the altar. Only now, the smirk carries a hardened edge, a public announcement of her triumph over me. From my vantage, I can see the brazen way she lets the other tellers and the customers behind me linger on her expression as if she's some grand performer, and I'm just the punchline. I resist the urge to grit my teeth. I just nod once, an imperceptible twitch in my jaw, and step forward to the counter. "Good afternoon," I say, voice steady but soft. The tellers around us pause. Even the beeping of the teller machine seems to hush. Marla doesn't return my greeting. Instead, she places her hands flat on the countertop, leaning forward, brow arching as if she's sizing up a stray dog daring to beg for scraps. "We don't serve beggars here," she announces in a voice calibrated to carry exactly across the lobby. The words hit me like gravel lodged in my throat. I can taste the metal of humiliation. Behind her, I catch the sharp intake of breath from a young woman clutching a stack of deposit envelopes. 2 men in suits glance at each other with raised eyebrows. An older man tipping his hat to her, as if congratulating her on a job well done. There is no kindness in her tone, no hesitation, just that unmistakable delight in my discomfort. I feel the heat rush into my face. A faint hum echoes in my ears, masking the soft voice of the teller calling the next customer. My fingers tighten on the withdrawal slip, crumpling its corners. I remind myself that this isn't about her anymore. It's about a man who needs $150 to do the right thing. Someone whose need far outweighs this meaningless display of cruelty. I swallow past the lump in my throat and lift my chin. "Understood," I murmur, voice calm. Then I turn away, avoiding her gaze as I step back into the line, letting the murmur of conversation resume around me. Each step away feels surreal, as though I'm exiting someone else's life, forced to participate in a scene I neither wrote nor care to watch. Outside, the air is cooler, scented faintly with rain on concrete. I pause at the glass doors, watching the sunlight scatter across the puddles left by an earlier shower. Shaking my head, I slip my hands into the pockets of my coat, pulling the slip from my wallet and inspecting it quietly. $150. Enough to help someone who truly matters. Someone whose name isn't Marla. I didn't come here for revenge, or to make her regret what she said. I came because this money will help my friend Jonah pay his rent after the sudden hospital bills that came his way last month. He's a good man, one who showed up without asking for anything after my grandmother died. He deserves this. I lean against the stone wall, pressing my shoulder to the cool surface. For a moment, I let myself feel the years of shame and rejection wash over me. But then I close my eyes, inhaling deeply, pushing the anger down to where it belongs, buried beneath ambition and purpose. For years ago, I would have let Marla's words define me. Today, they fuel my resolve. I straighten, offering no glance back as I head down the street to the ATM tucked beside the florist shop. Each footstep echoes with a quiet triumph. I have moved on. I have rebuilt. I have learned that respect is earned not by demanding it, but by living with integrity even when no one is watching. At the ATM, I slide my card into the machine. The screen flickers to life, prompting me for my PIN. My fingers dance over the keypad with practiced ease. Withdrawal. Savings. $150. I collect the cash, crisp and white in my hand, the very thing that once symbolized my failure now becoming a tool of compassion. I tuck the bills into an envelope, scribble Jonah's name on the front, and seal it with a firm crease. On the walk to his apartment, I think about the man I've become, Silas Donnelly, plain-spoken, unremarkable to some, but driven by quiet convictions that no bank teller or ex-wife can ever take away. I think of Marla, standing behind that counter, convinced she holds power over me. Yet she doesn't see the empire I've built in secret, the respect I've garnered through hard work, or the lives I've touched with every investment I've made under my pseudonym. She sees only the man who once let her words shatter him. What she cannot see is that shattered pieces can be gathered, polished, and rebuilt into something stronger than before. I reach Jonah's front door and wait for his buzz. As the lock clicks open, I step inside with that envelope held out in my hand. His eyes widen in gratitude as he realizes what it is. In that moment, I know I've served the only people who ever truly mattered. And that is more than enough hello for me. They all think I live small, quiet, ordinary. When I walk down the street in my threadbare coat and scuffed boots, they see a rental apartment tenant who keeps his head down and his wallet light. They don't know that when Marla walked out on me, I didn't simply pick up the pieces, I redefined myself from the ground up. My grandmother left me a modest inheritance when she passed, little more than seed money, but it was enough. I poured every dollar into a venture I named Fireline Capital, persuading a handful of industry insiders to back me on a series of low-profile, high-margin tech projects. I learned to speak the languages of fintech and venture capital so fluently that no one ever suspected I was still Silas Donnelly. Today, Fireline Capital stands as a silent investment giant, managing billions under the radar. Elite insiders know it by its cryptic ticker symbol. To the rest of the world, it doesn't exist. By day, I wear the same old clothes and drive the same modest sedan I bought 3 years ago. My apartment looks like any other mid-range rental: a threadbare couch, a second-hand desk, a chipped coffee table littered with invoices and medical bills from my friend Jonah. My neighbors think I'm a freelance graphic designer or maybe a temp worker at the post office. They hear the faint hum of my laptop late at night but never think to peek through the blinds. In their eyes, I'm just a quiet man who prefers solitude. They don't know that I've rigged my home network behind multiple firewalls, that every transaction I make funnels through shell corporations and offshore accounts. Under every layer of anonymity lies K. Dorn, the name under which I sign off on billion-dollar transfers and board-level decisions. No one ties that pseudonym to me. Marla, especially, remains blissfully unaware. She still calls me Silas the Loser in staff meetings when someone leaves coffee cups around. She still rolls her eyes if I make a rare appearance at her mother's holiday gatherings. Yet the institution she manages, Lindale Federal, now sits indirectly under my control. Through a complex parent company acquisition engineered by Fireline Capital, I moved quietly behind the scenes to purchase a significant minority stake in Lindale's holding company. I never sought seats on any public board. I merely whispered into the right ears, offered covert assurances, and let the news break as a fait accompli. By the time the press release hit, my name was nowhere attached. The announcement read like any other anonymous private equity play. Every morning, I slip into a nondescript suit, charcoal gray, single-breasted, and tie a plain black tie. I grab my battered briefcase, inside which lie 2 smartphones, one secured to military-grade encryption, a stack of contracts, and an unmarked USB drive loaded with Fireline's detailed portfolio reports. I walk into the same coffee shop around the corner, sit at the same table, and order the same soy latte. The barista greets me by name but assumes I'm someone's assistant picking up a delivery. I sit there for an hour, scanning headlines on a burner tablet, pretending to read about downtown construction projects while monitoring the liquidity ratios of my latest acquisitions. I know the market movements before most analysts wake up, but I let them think it's magic. It's not. It's relentless research, countless late nights, and a refusal to let anyone see me sweat. Only once, last month, did I break the pattern. I picked up the phone and dialed Ida Tran, my personal counsel and Fireline's fund liaison, with an uncharacteristically sharp edge in my voice. "Ida," I said, "initiate an extraction audit on Lindale Federal Bank. Their branch in Lindale Heights just failed a basic respect audit." She laughed, soft, incredulous laughter, before reminding me that respect audits weren't real. I clarified. "Their branch manager publicly humiliated me. I want that branch underperforming assets reviewed. Prepare for a $4.2 billion reallocation, effective immediately." Within minutes, her team had assembled the compliance reports, drafted the memos, and set the wheels in motion. By week's end, the parent institution would face a liquidity shift so severe it would spark board-level panic and send Marla scrambling for explanations she couldn't find. I hung up feeling a curious thrill, the same rush I used to feel when Marla smiled in approval. Only this time, it belonged entirely to me. Every evening, I returned to my rented unit and shut the door behind me, muting the city's distant sirens and car horns. I change out of my suit, slip into comfortable clothes, and open my laptop. There, in the quiet glow of the screen, I review the day's trades, reassign portfolio weights, and draft new directives under the name K. Dorn. I send secure messages to our offshore partners, instructing them on upcoming acquisitions. I watch as billions cascade through the digital pipelines I've built, funding emerging startups and rescue loans that transform struggling communities, just not the ones Marla ever cared to help. I think of the moment I'll walk into that bank again, not as Silas the supplicant in line, but as K. Dorn, the most valuable client they've ever had. When Marla looks up and realizes who I am, when the recognition finally dawns, the smirk will be gone, replaced by a tremor of panic. She'll meet my gaze and see that I still wear that battered coat, still drive that modest sedan, but I wield power she can't imagine. And in that moment, I will know that the mask of Silas Donnelly has long been discarded, replaced by something far stronger, quiet mastery of an empire built in shadows. I watched the morning sun cut through the blinds of my office window like a blade, illuminating motes of dust drifting in the stale air. The city beyond stretched wide and indifferent, its skyscrapers gleaming as if nothing mattered except commerce, profit, and power. Down here, behind the reinforced door and the high walls of my secure workspace, I dealt in silence. Fireline Capital's clandestine nerve center, a nondescript floor in a midtown tower, felt like the cockpit of a submarine, surrounded by the relentless currents of global finance. From my seat at the head of the conference table, I surveyed 3 screens displaying live asset flows, stock tickers, and the internal risk dashboard that I had personally configured to flare bright red whenever any of my holdings wavered below a predetermined threshold. My personal counsel, Ida Tran, sat across from me, her perfectly tailored blazer as sharp as her mind. Aida's eyes never strayed from the data streaming on her tablet, but I could sense her anticipation. She laughed softly when I first broached the plan, just a whisper in my ear, late at night, under the glow of my laptop. But when she fully understood the scope of what I intended, her professional decorum cracked, if only for a millisecond. Now, with the final authorization sorted and our offshore affiliate standing by, she was ready. I tapped my fingers lightly on the table, a metronome counting down to the moment when Lindale Federal's liquidity would shudder. "Proceed with the transfer request," I said, voice calm but cold as the marble surface beneath my fingertips. "Initiate the $4.2 billion asset reallocation. Follow our standard protocol, multiple jurisdictional channels, immediate liquidity call, reroute to our Community First Fund." Her lips curved in a half smile. "Already in motion." The compliance bots flagged the disparity in branch performance after your respect audit memo. "They're drafting the official notice now." I nodded once. No celebration. No gloating. This wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. I had played by the rules, built my empire from a modest inheritance, and mastered the art of silent influence. Marla, on the other hand, still clung to the illusion that she could degrade me in public without consequence. She thought that last humiliation, demanding to know why I would ever come back for $150, was the final word. She was wrong. Ida minimized her screen and leaned forward. "You realize the parent institution will see an immediate outflow, triggering margin calls. Their capital ratios will drop below regulatory minimums in a matter of hours. If Halbridge doesn't secure emergency funding, they'll have to freeze withdrawals." I allowed a brief exhale. Let them freeze. Let them endure that moment when the doors clang shut, and clients discover they can't access their own money. That panic will send their share price plummeting by tomorrow's close. It will erase any illusion that Lindale Federal is safe, and Marla will be at the epicenter of the fallout. She tapped a few commands into her tablet, then set it aside. One more thing. Should we prepare the external statement attributing the shift to routine portfolio rebalancing? I frowned thoughtfully. No. Keep it strictly internal for now. A single leak to the Financial Times will be enough. No press release. Let speculation do the work. The board will be scrambling to explain the liquidity crisis while regulators conjure investigations. The uglier it gets, the better. Aida's eyes flicked up and down in admiration. As you wish, Mr. Dorn. The moniker K. Dorn felt foreign on her tongue but carried weight in every boardroom. Sometimes I nearly forgot it wasn't my given name. It had become the vessel for every strategic maneuver, every covert acquisition. Silas Donnelly remained the shadow, the sacrifice I offered to Marla's mockery. K. Dorn was the architect of global leverage. As she tapped the final keys, I caught my reflection in the dark screen of my central monitor. The man staring back wore a charcoal suit, neatly combed hair, and a face that revealed nothing. I recognized the impassive observer, the sentinel who had weathered Marla's sting and emerged stronger. No longer a man chasing someone else's sense of worth, but someone who defined value on his own terms. Within minutes, our offshore liaison confirmed the transfer initiation. Funds were routed through 5 different financial centers: Zurich, Singapore, London, Dubai, and finally into our newly established Community First Fund in Lagos, a project I had quietly supported to revitalize local microenterprises. Those dollars would seed small businesses, fund educational scholarships, and spark sustainable agriculture initiatives. Money that once belonged to depositors at Lindale Federal would now flourish where it was truly cherished. I leaned back as the first email alerts chimed. Transfer authorization complete. Liquidity call initiated. Margin coverage alert. The board members of the holding company would be pulling their hair out soon, but I felt no schadenfreude. This was business, not personal vindictiveness. Yet I felt something else swell in my chest, a quiet satisfaction that justice, even if enacted from afar, had its way. Ida cleared her throat softly. Should we inform our legal team to prepare for potential litigation? I shook my head. No. Let them sue. Every day they waste on lawyers and court filings is another day their assets remain immobilized. And when they eventually realize who's behind it, the shame will be far more crushing than any fine or legal injunction. Marla will watch them crumble before she can even process what's happening. Outside my window, the city pulsed with oblivious energy. Commuters hurried to subways. Street vendors peddled sandwiches. The world carried on, unaware that a financial earthquake was rippling beneath their feet. I thought back to that humiliating line she spoke, the one that lingered in me for years. We don't serve beggars here. She had believed that I would always beg. Now, it was her bank that begged, for liquidity, for forgiveness, for a miracle they could no longer conjure. I gathered my papers and slipped them into a leather portfolio stamped with the discreet initials KD. I rose, feeling the familiar power of purpose flow through me. Ida stood and followed suit, both of us glancing one final time at the screens. Anything else? She asked, voice low. I tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, my gaze resolute. No. Let it play out. Then we'll schedule the follow-up meeting in 2 weeks to assess the impact and decide on next steps. We exited the room, cutting across the sunlit atrium where junior analysts in button-down shirts and slim ties tapped at tablets and chatted about weekend plans. They barely glanced at us, another high-level meeting in progress, yet their hurried footsteps seemed to quicken, as if they sensed the tremor in the corridors. As I stepped into the elevator, I allowed myself a small, private smile. My phone buzzed with a single message from Jonah. Hey man, thanks again for last night. You're a lifesaver. I considered replying with reassurance but tucked the phone back into my pocket. My involvement in his life was none of Marla's concern. He had his money. I had my mission. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, I strode out into the midday bustle, adjusted my tie, and pulled my coat collar up AG. For years had passed since Marla's declaration. In that time, I had transformed humiliation into ambition, bitterness into strategy, and rejection into the cornerstone of a silent empire. Today, my assets were redefined, my purpose reaffirmed, and my heart, once frozen by her callous words, now beat with the warmth of plans fulfilled. The branches of Lindale Federal would not thaw easily, nor would the hearts of its board members. As for Marla, when she learns that the man she once dismissed is the very force orchestrating her downfall, still hidden behind his rented apartment and beaten-up car, she will realize that her cruelty yielded a power she never anticipated. And in that reckoning, I will find my true victory, not in the collapse of her golden image, but in the rebirth of my own story. A story that never began with her approval, but with the quiet resolve to rise, no matter how cold the world became. The next morning, I approached Lindale Federal's main branch on Broadstone Avenue as K. Dorn, not Silas Donnelly. I wore a bespoke charcoal suit, no threadbare coat today, tailored to perfection, with a subtle pinstripe that spoke of quiet confidence. My shoes gleamed, my tie was silk, and my posture was unassailable. As I stepped into the marble lobby, the doorman, a contract security officer hired through a shell company, gave me a curt nod and opened the brass doors before I reached them. I didn't stand in line. Instead, I passed through a discreet side entrance reserved for high-value clients. The reception area here was understated luxury, dark walnut panels, soft lighting, and fresh orchids in glass vases. No tacky posters about community banking or your local branch to distract from the gravity of business being conducted within these walls. I crossed the lobby with a steady stride, clutching my leather briefcase stamped with the KD insignia, and paused at the desk where a single receptionist, handpicked by my liaison, greeted me. "Mr. Dorn," she said, voice hushed and respectful, pressing a button under her desk. "Mr. Halbridge is awaiting you in his office." "Thank you," I replied, voice calm. I felt the difference instantly. Last week, when I was Silas Donnelly, I couldn't even get past the front door without waiting in line. Today, I was escorted through a private corridor to the elevators, walls carpeted in deep burgundy, artfully backlit abstract paintings, plush seating and brushed suede. I reached the executive floor and emerged into an area where assistants in tailored blouses and press slacks glanced up from their screens to offer polite smiles. No one recognized me. To them, I was K. Dorn, a powerful mystery. Mr. Halbridge's office was at the end of the hall, a glass-fronted suite overlooking the financial district. His desk was spotless, save for a leather-bound planner and a digital frame cycling through family photos. He stood when I entered, extending a hand that trembled ever so slightly. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Dorn," he said, voice strained, eyes darting from me to the briefcase in my hand. "Of course," I said, setting the case on a side table and taking a seat in the walnut guest chair. He took his own seat behind the desk, then cleared his throat. "I'm afraid I understand you have concerns regarding our liquidity." I nodded, folding my hands in my lap. "Yes. Fireline Capital initiated a reallocation of $4.2 billion this morning. We began a routine risk assessment, and the results were concerning. I wanted to discuss it in person rather than through memos." His face went pale. He swallowed audibly and glanced at the framed photos, a wife, 2 children, summer vacation smiles. He looked back up at me, panic flickering in his eyes. I didn't realize it would be so immediate." I leaned forward, voice measured. "Based on internal performance data, one branch failed to meet basic customer respect standards. Protocol dictated an audit. Your branch manager publicly humiliated a client, me, under my personal name. That conduct contravened our code of acceptable interactions, which we consider grounds for performance reevaluation." He rubbed his temples. "I see. I appreciate the discretion of your visit. I've already convened the executive committee. We're exploring options, emergency funding, asset sale, anything to restore confidence." I tilted my head slightly, considering his words. Restoring confidence won't be enough. What's required is accountability. I expect the branch manager to be removed from her position effective immediately, and for the transfer to be partially reversed, return at least $1.5 billion to the general fund to demonstrate good faith. Only then will we consider resuming normal credit facilities with Lindale Federal. He flinched, his knuckles whitening around the planner at his side. "Ms. Donnelly," he began. "Marla." I corrected him softly but firmly. "Yes, Ms. Donnelly's removal. And the partial reversal." "Understood." He cleared his throat. "I will implement that. We will draft the necessary paperwork. Effective today." I allowed a slow exhale, though it was contained. "Good. I'd also like a formal apology issued to Silas Donnelly. Publicly, on your website or local press. As a gesture of contrition." His lips trembled, and he looked at his leather-bound planner as though searching for solace in its blank pages. An apology? To Silas Donnelly. I nodded. Yes, my personal account. Once that is in place, Fireline Capital will consider resuming the remaining transfer. My counsel will prepare the documents, but I wanted verbal assurances from you first. I trust you understand the gravity. His head bobbed. Absolutely. You'll have the statement by this afternoon, and the partial reversal by close of business. I stood, picking up my briefcase, feeling the smooth leather warm in my grip. I offered him one last look, sympathetic, yet unwavering. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Halbridge. I hope this can be resolved swiftly. He rose unsteadily and extended his hand again. Thank you, Mr. Dorn. I clasped his hand firmly, then turned and walked out, leaving him standing by the window, staring down at the city as though it had betrayed him. The hallway outside felt charged, as if the air itself recognized the shift in power. I passed a junior analyst returning from a meeting, her tablet clutched to her chest. She gave me a curious glance, but I was already crossing the lobby to the elevator, where I pressed the button for the ground floor without looking back. As the door slid shut, I allowed myself a private smile. The gravity of the situation would ripple through the bank's financials and reputations, but in this moment, I reveled in the simple elegance of authority exercised without rancor. I did not need to raise my voice, slap down legal threats, or stage a spectacle. I simply walked in as K. Dorn, respected, enigmatic, unassailable, and watched the strategy unfold. When I reached the street, I stepped into the cool air and adjusted my tie. The morning bustle flowed around me, but I felt detached, buoyed by the certainty of my actions. I had entered Marla's domain not as the humiliated ex-husband, but as the client whose decisions would topple her world. I hailed a cab, gave the driver a nondescript address downtown, and settled into the back seat. My phone buzzed with a secure message from Ida. Preparations complete. Partial reversal scheduled for 3 p.m. Apology draft approved. We'll send for sign-off. I tapped out a brief reply. Excellent. Thank you. Then I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment. The city passed by the tinted window, shops opening, people rushing to meetings, the relentless pulse of urban life. For years ago, I never would have imagined reclaiming my narrative so completely. I had entered this bank beaten, pleading for a mere $150. Now I controlled billions, spoke only when necessary, and wielded influence that no one could trace back to the man in the beaten coat. As the cab turned onto Avenue C, I squared my shoulders and looked ahead. The real power meeting was concluded. The bank's corridors would quake with the aftermath, and Marla would soon learn that the man she sneered at was the force steering her destiny. And that power, exercised with calm precision, was my true triumph. I settled into the leather guest chair in Marla's glass-walled office, the early afternoon sunlight glinting off the brass plaque on her door. Marla Donnelly, branch manager. The polished surface reflected her name back at me like an epitaph, and I felt a flicker of the old anger, no, pity, rise in my chest. Across the desk, Mr. Halbridge hovered, his usually confident posture reduced to a hesitant lean against the edge of the mahogany surface. Marla stood to one side of him, her arms folded over the crisply pressed blouse she wore as armor, her lipstick too bright for the tremor in her voice. When she saw me enter, the recognition flickered in her eyes, astonishment, denial, dawning horror, and she leaned back against the wall, as though bracing herself against a tidal wave. Halbridge cleared his throat. Mr. Dorn, thank you for coming. The words trailed off, as though he expected me to respond with praise. Instead, I closed the gap between us with deliberate slowness, feeling the weight of my presence fill the room. My briefcase swung lightly in my hand, though the leather strap felt heavier than usual. I set it on the floor and met Marla's gaze directly, letting silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably. I sat and folded my hands on the desk, watching her. I'll be direct, I said, my voice low yet carrying in the hollow stillness. Fireline Capital is initiating a $4.2 billion reallocation of assets from this institution due to gross mishandling by this branch's management. I paused to let it sink in. Her breath hitched, and I saw the color drain from Halbridge's face. Specifically, I continued, this reallocation stems from an incident earlier this week, when a request to withdraw $150 was denied with hostility and public humiliation. Marla's mouth opened, closed, words dying on her lips. She glanced at Halbridge, then back at me, disbelief replacing defiance. That was a misunderstanding, she stammered. I didn't know. You knew exactly who I was, I said, inclining my head. You made it abundantly clear to everyone in the lobby that I was unworthy of service. You told me, and everyone else, we don't serve beggars here. I waited while her breath fluttered out. Halbridge cleared his throat again, or perhaps I imagined it, a desperate cough before the shattered man tried to speak. Marla, please. I held up a hand, stopping him. No, this isn't her defense. It's her accountability. I turned my gaze fully on Marla, seeing the taut line of her jaw, the tension pooling in her shoulders. You are responsible for this branch's reputation. You are the first line of customer relations. And yet you wielded your position to degrade someone you once called your husband. My voice grew quieter, colder. You took your personal disdain and made it public theater. You humiliated me personally, but more consequentially, you undermined our trust in your leadership. Her eyes clouded, vulnerability replacing indignation. She bit her lip, then forced the words out in a whisper. I'm sorry. The single word hung in the air, as insubstantial as a sigh. Sorry isn't enough, I said. I opened my briefcase and withdrew a bound dossier stamped with Fireline Capital's seal. The thick stack of papers looked incongruous against the sterile expanse of Marla's desk. I slid it forward. This is the preliminary impact assessment for Lindale Federal Holdings. It outlines the steps you must take to begin restoring confidence. Halbridge's eyes darted to the cover, then to me. I pressed on. Section 4B, Immediate Termination of the Branch Manager. Section 6A, Public Apology to Silas Donnelly. Section 9, Partial Reversal of $1.5 billion by close of business today. And Section 12, Implementation of a formal retraining program for all customer-facing staff. I paused, watching Marla's eyes scan the page, comprehension dawning. These are non-negotiable conditions. Fireline Capital will withhold the remaining funds until these measures are executed. Marla's head dropped, and she wrapped her arms around herself as though shielding against a blow. For a moment, I allowed a flicker of old tenderness. Once, I would have stepped forward, touched her arm, whispered forgiveness. Today, I felt only resolve. The woman who left me calling me worthless had to learn that her actions carried real consequences. Halbridge cleared his throat again, voice unsteady. I understand. I will implement these directives immediately. An official notice will be drafted within the hour, and you will receive a copy. And Marla. He hesitated, glancing at her, but Marla lifted her chin, as though daring him to intervene. His hesitation stiffened his features. He was trapped between corporate obligation and personal sympathy. I shook my head slowly. No more delays. I closed the dossier and slid it back across the desk into my briefcase. I will return tomorrow to confirm completion. Until then, consider this branch's credibility and your career on the line. I stood, picking up my briefcase. Marla remained rooted to the spot, her eyes distant, as though watching a version of herself she no longer recognized. Halbridge rose as well, attempting to steady his composure. Thank you, Mr. Dorn, he managed. I inclined my head. Marla's eyes flickered to mine, something like guilt or fear tremored behind them. Maybe regret. Whatever it wasn't enough. I turned on my heel, feeling the leather of the briefcase give weight to each step, and strode out of the office, leaving them both behind. In the corridor, the hush of hushed conversations and clicking keyboards seemed a world away. I reached the elevator bank, pressed the button, and waited in silence. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and offered a polite nod to the lone passenger. A middle manager clutching a tablet, whose wide eyes reflected confusion and curiosity. I pressed the lobby button and rode down in quiet triumph, listening to the soft hum of the cables overhead. At the lobby entrance, I paused by the glass doors and looked back up at the skyscraper, its mirrored facade reflecting the city in endless repetition. In that reflection, I saw myself, a man who walked into his ex-wife's fortress of confidence and dismantled it with facts, leverage, and measured authority. I felt no glee, only satisfaction that justice, managed with calm precision, had its due. Outside, the city moved on. A street musician riffled through notes on a saxophone, a bicycle messenger wove through traffic, and light glinted off the windows of passing cars. I buttoned my suit jacket and brushed a stray lock of hair from my forehead. For years ago, I was the beggar at the window. Now, I held the power of billions in my hands, and every step I took resonated with the knowledge that I had rewritten my own worth. I hailed a cab, climbed inside, and gave the driver my next address. As the cityscape blurred past the tinted window, I breathed deeply, tasting freedom. For Marla, the collapse of her golden image was imminent. For me, the peace that follows rightful vindication settled in my bones. In that quiet victory, I found closure and the promise of new beginnings beyond her judgment and her bank's doors. I watched the security doors slide open and close, sealing Marla off from her former colleagues, as if her tenure at Lindale Federal had been nothing more than a passing breeze through these marbled halls. She stood in front of me, shoulders hunched, eyes blank as though she had just woken from a dream and found herself in a nightmare of her own design. The echo of her footsteps faded down the corridor, replaced by the distant clack of keyboard keys and muffled conversations about quarter-end projections. She clutched her purse like a lifeline, the strap digging into her pale wrist, and glanced back at me once, just once, before slipping out of my sight. In that moment, I felt the weight of 4 years of indignity lift, as if the universe itself had granted me the courtesy of silent retribution. The room felt cavernous after she left, emptier somehow, as if the walls themselves had recoiled at her fall from grace. Mr. Halbridge folded his hands on the desk, clearing his throat with practiced hesitation. He peered at me over the rim of his glasses, voice low and uncertain. "Mr. Dorn, I can confirm that Ms. Donnelly's employment has been terminated, effective immediately. I've instructed security to escort her off the premises." And he exhaled. "I have drafted the public apology as requested." I nodded, watching the slightest quiver in his voice. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I trust you handled this with the discretion we discussed." He shifted in his chair, loosening his tie. "Of course. We did not alert the press beforehand. The statement will run on our website at 3 p.m. today, and we notified the local business journal. No additional leaks." "Excellent." I allowed a small, satisfied smile to curve my lips. It felt strangely hollow, like reading the last lines of a play you already knew by heart, but I welcomed it. After all, this wasn't about spectacle. It was about justice served with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I closed my briefcase and stood, the polished wood of the desk warming my fingertips through the leather handle. With her removal finalized, I expect to see the partial reversal of $1.5 billion by end of day. His eyes flicked back to the planner on his desk, as though it held the answers he desperately sought. "That will happen. I'll oversee it personally." I inclined my head. "Good. Once that is complete, we can discuss restoring the remaining $2.7 billion. He swallowed, nodding stiffly. The irony that he now had to beg for my good favor was not lost on me. I turned to leave, pausing at the door to take a final measure of the man who had once dismissed me as a petty inconvenience. He was still the same Halbridge, composed smile, tailored suit, but the tremor under his calm veneer was unmistakable. He folded his hands together as if in prayer, and for a fleeting second, I considered offering him words of reassurance. Instead, I stepped out into the hall, closing the door behind me with the softest of clicks, as though to punctuate the end of her reign and the beginning of mine. The corridor stretched before me, fluorescent lights casting even pools of illumination on the carpeted floor. A single assistant hurried past, scanning a sheet of paper, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just taken place. I passed without breaking stride, my shoes whispering against the carpet. No one stopped me, no one congratulated me, and no one glared. It was the quiet aftermath of a storm, calm, still, and irrevocable. When I reached the elevator bank, I pressed the button for the lobby and waited in silence. The panel glowed under my touch, counting down the seconds until the doors would open and I could return to the city below, where no marble or glass could contain the rhythms of my life. As the doors slid open, I stepped inside and offered a polite nod to the lone executive in the corner, who barely registered my presence. The elevator hummed downward, carrying me away from the epicenter of her downfall. Back on the street, the world outside continued its relentless pace. Taxis honked, pedestrians weaved through crosswalks, a bike courier rattled past on delivery duty. I buttoned my suit jacket and adjusted my tie, the crisp fabric Remy. Appreciate the precision of it all. By 3, the apology would be live. By 5, $1.5 billion would be back in the bank's reserves. Then I would decide whether to restore the rest or leave the institution to navigate the choppy waters I had created. I slipped my phone from my pocket and opened the secure messaging app to see Aida's update. Termination confirmed. Partial reversal scheduled. Apology live at 3 p.m. Beneath it, a single thumbs-up emoji from her. I tapped back. Perfect. Thank you. Tucking the phone away, I hailed a cab and slid into the back seat, the upholstery immaculate beneath me. I gave the driver the address of my new estate by the lake, an old holding company of mine disguised as a property management shell, and relaxed into the leather. As we pulled away, I watched the city blur past the tinted window, skyscrapers giving way to tree-lined streets. In a few minutes, I would be home, where no title or apology could reach me. I closed my eyes and reflected on how far I had come, from the man humiliated at the teller's counter to the architect of my ex-wife's professional ruin. The transformation felt surreal, yet inevitable. I thought of the beggar I had once been, trembling in line for a mere $150. Now, I controlled billions. That man was gone, replaced by someone who wielded power not for vengeance, but for the quiet assertion of self-worth. When the cab turned onto my long driveway, I caught sight of the lake beyond, its surface shimmering under the late afternoon sun. The sprawling lawn and the stone facade of my home rose up like a sanctuary built from ambition and tempered by restraint. I slid the envelope containing Jonah's $150 from my pocket and tucked it back into my briefcase. That small act of kindness, unnoticed by anyone but him, remained my truest measure of success. The cab pulled up to the circular drive, and I stepped out, the soft grass crunching under my polished shoes. The driver nodded, and I handed him the fare without a word. He drove off, leaving me alone with the stillness of my sanctuary. I walked to the front door, paused, and inhaled deeply. The air smelled of pine and water. No boardroom, no apology, no security escort could follow me here. I touched the brass door handle and stepped inside, leaving the world of marble and glass behind. Inside, light filtered through the tall windows, slanting across the hardwood floors. My grandmother's portrait hung on the wall, her gentle eyes watching over me as they had for decades. I let out a soft laugh, an echo of relief, and set down my briefcase. Marla was fired without a fight, stripped of her title and her dignity. But in this house, title meant nothing. Here, I was Silas Donnelly, a man who had reclaimed his narrative through measured strategy and unwavering resolve. I poured myself a glass of water, the cool liquid sliding down my throat like redemption. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. I raised the glass in a silent toast, to endings, to rebirth, and to the quiet knowledge that the best revenge is a life rebuilt. By the time I stepped through my front door, the sky was a bruised purple, and the house felt impossibly still. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, sliding off my jacket and loosening my tie. My phone buzzed insistently in my pocket, a harsh reminder that the fallout from the bank was spreading faster than I'd anticipated. I sank onto the couch and unlocked the screen. The first message was from Dana, Marla's sister. What did you do to her? She's in shock. Her text trembled with panic, as though she'd just discovered a loved one in a hospital bed. I stared at the words for a moment, then typed back. I held her accountable. No point in sugarcoating it. A second buzz, Marla's mother. Please tell me you're not responsible. Beneath the fear and pleading was anger, betrayal. A family divided by my actions, but not my intentions. I held my thumb over the screen, deciding whether to reply. Instead, I set the phone aside, turning my gaze to the lake beyond the windows. The water's surface rippled gently, uncaring of human drama. But the phone buzzed again, and this time it was Marla. A voicemail. I pressed play. Her voice, shaky and raw, spilled through the speaker. Silas, please. It was just a joke. I didn't mean it. We were family once. Why did you have to ruin everything? Her words tumbled out in a rush of sobs. I closed my eyes, feeling the old sting of her betrayal pulse in my chest. Yet I also felt resolve. No mercy for cruelty. I muted the voicemail and opened my laptop, logging into the secure network I'd built for Fireline's executive operations. The asset reallocation had been confirmed, the apology published, and the partial reversal scheduled for end of day. Everything was unfolding according to plan. I drafted a brief announcement to my board. Phase 1 complete. Monitoring liquidity recovery. Preparing Phase 2 directives. Then I leaned back, hands clasped behind my head, and let the rhythms of the ticking clock fill the silence. Another buzz. Jonah. Hey man. You there? I smiled faintly and tapped out. Just got home. Everything okay? He replied almost instantly. Yeah. Just wanted to thank you again for the help. You're a lifesaver. My chest warmed. No matter how high I climbed, helping him had meant more than any billion-dollar transfer. The final message came late. An email from Fireline's compliance department noting unusual inquiry from regulatory authorities into Lindale Federal's liquidity shift. They advised preparing a legal cushion in case the bank tried to claw funds back. I read the memo and drafted instructions. Hold course. Any legal challenge only strengthens our position. Proceed with Phase 2 as scheduled. I sent it off and closed the lid. I stood and walked to the window, looking out across my manicured lawn toward the water's edge. In the gathering dusk, lights gleamed from my neighbors' homes, unaware of the storm that had passed through Marla's world. I sipped a glass of water, tasting its purity, a stark contrast to the bitterness of corporate warfare. Tonight, the messages flew like arrows, but none could pierce the shield I'd built around myself. The only voices that mattered were those I chose to hear: Jonah's gratitude, Aida's confirmations, and the unwavering pulse of my own resolve. Marla's cries would echo long after, but they would not sway me. Because in reclaiming my narrative, I had learned that the only approval worth seeking was my own. I sent the invitation under my holding company's name, dinner at the Donnelly residence, and watched the RSVPs appear in my inbox: Marla's parents, her sister Dana, and a handful of their closest family friends. They claimed they wanted to resolve things civilly, so I arranged the event for Saturday evening at my lakefront estate. When they arrived, they walked through the grand iron gates and up the flagstone path, eyes widening at the manicured hedges and the softly glowing lanterns lining the walkway. They gathered on the veranda, murmuring compliments while I greeted each one in turn, offering them champagne flutes filled with a pale, sparkling wine I had imported for the occasion. I wore a simple black blazer and dark jeans, no suit, no pretense, letting the setting speak for itself. Dinner was served in the dining room, a room they had last seen in happier times but never this elegantly appointed. White linen tablecloth, low floral arrangements, candles flickering in crystal holders. I seated them at a long mahogany table, with Marla's father at my right and her mother at his left. Dana sat across from them, nervously fingering her napkin. No one dared sit in her chair. Marla never showed up. I poured red wine into their glasses, then raised mine in a toast. Thank you all for coming. I know this must be difficult, but I believe in civilization's last refuge: honest conversation. They exchanged uneasy glances as I laid out the first course. Conversation faltered until her father cleared his throat. Silas, whatever this is about, we appreciate the invitation. We just want to. I set down my fork, cutting him off gently. Please, hold your thoughts until dessert. They blinked, uncertain whether to applaud or protest. The next courses arrived: seared salmon, spring salad, roasted vegetables, all perfectly prepared by a chef I'd hired under the guise of a housewarming. All the while, I let tension build, watching the flicker of confusion in their eyes. When the plates were cleared, I poured them coffee and uncorked a bottle of port. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and extracted a slim folder stamped with the Fireline logo. Silence fell. I placed one copy at each setting. I believe in transparency, I said quietly. This is a compilation of financial documents. Fraudulent transfers from the family trust your late uncle left for community development. Transfers authorized by Marla and Dana. Shell companies. Invoices for non-existent services. I paused, letting the weight of it sink in. Dana's hand flew to her mouth. Her mother's cheeks drained of color. Her father's jaw clenched. I continued. You accused me of cruelty, but the true crime was committed here. I tapped the folder. Your calculations siphoned over $2 million intended for scholarships and small businesses. My team documented every transaction. You can either return the remaining funds or face legal action. Her father's shoulders slumped. Silas, No apologies, I interrupted firmly. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about restitution. I stood, chair scraping softly against the floor. Decide quickly. The documents have been sent to your attorneys and the district attorney's office. You have 1 week. I walked toward the door as they sat, stunned into silence, their faces pale reflections of remorse and fear. Outside, the lake was still under a blanket of moonlight. Inside, I heard the soft rustle of papers as they opened the folders, the muffled gasp of realization, and the quiet lament of a family unraveling. I paused at the threshold, allowing them one final glance. Good evening, I said, then stepped into the night air and closed the door behind me. I returned to the house hours before dawn, the sky still a bruise of navy and purple, and carried with me the hollow weight of truth uncovered. Inside, the living room was dark, lit only by the glow of my laptop left open on the coffee table. I sank into the couch and opened the folder I had placed before Marla's family, the one containing every illicit transaction they had authorized. I scrolled through the balance sheets, shell company invoices, and trust distributions that exposed how Dana and Marla had quietly diverted funds from their late uncle's estate into personal accounts. $2 million earmarked for community scholarships and microloans, siphoned away in neat, untraceable increments. A single red line on a ledger had unraveled everything. My phone buzzed with a secure message from Ida. Family has until next Friday. DA notified, awaiting their response. I tapped back, understood. The transaction logs blinked at me, cold testimony to their betrayal. I closed the laptop and stood, moving to the window to watch the first stars fade as dawn crept in. The garden beyond was empty, the plaque shining in soft moonlight, in honor of quiet growth. How fitting that they had tried to steal the very means by which I sought to uplift others. I poured a glass of water and walked through the kitchen, considering my next move. The legal option was straightforward: full restitution or court. But I sensed an even deeper satisfaction in watching them choose compliance over disgrace. I could hear their muted sobs, the hushed promises exchanged in fear of indictment. Justice, when served not by spectacle but by silent exposure, felt the most potent kind. A knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Jonah, bleary-eyed and clutching 2 mugs of coffee. He handed me one and sat across the table, eyes flicking to the closed laptop. "Late night?" he asked softly. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. "Family drama," I said. He nodded again, understanding more than he knew. We drank in companionable silence, the steam rising like ghosts of past mistakes. Jonah tapped his mug on the table. "They'll do the right thing," he said. "You gave them the chance." I managed a small smile. He was always the optimist. "They have no choice." I sipped, feeling the warmth spread. He glanced at the laptop and frowned. "You okay?" His concern felt genuine, free of pity. "More than okay," I replied. "I'm at peace." I stood and switched on the kettle, filling it for tea. "You know," I said as I waited, "they thought the worst punishment was my intervention. But sometimes the worst is simply having your illusions stripped away." He nodded, his gaze steady. The kettle clicked off, and I poured boiling water into 2 mugs. We carried them to the kitchen island and leaned against the stone surface. Outside, the first hints of sunrise colored the horizon. My phone buzzed again, Dana's attorney confirming receipt of the restitution agreement. I set it aside. Jonah traced the rim of his mug. "You deserved better," he said quietly. I met his eyes, gratitude mingling with resolve. "I did. But this is how I chose to rewrite my story." I gestured toward the garden beyond the window, where seedlings awaited nurturing. Growth comes from uncovering roots. Sometimes the rotten ones must be exposed before new life can flourish. He smiled, raising his mug in a toast to quiet growth. I tapped my mug against his, feeling the satisfying clink. As the sun peeked over the lake, I knew the family would comply, the funds would return, and the community would prosper. More importantly, my narrative, once defined by loss and shame, now stood rooted in integrity and resilience. And that, I realized, was the truest revenge of all. I stand at the edge of the Renfield Community Garden just before dawn, the air crisp with promise. The beds I helped design stretch out before me, rows of basil, peppers, and heirloom tomatoes thriving in neat patches, newly laid stone paths winding between them. In the center, a bronze plaque gleams in soft morning light, in honor of quiet growth. My fingers brush its cool surface as I survey the scene, feeling a quiet pride bloom inside me. This garden was once a derelict lot, choked with weeds and litter, but today it pulses with life, the culmination of the reallocated funds, the community-first institution I quietly nurtured. I recall the day I made the final transfer, redirecting the assets from Lindale Federal into this very project. It wasn't a flashy donation, framed in press releases or paraded in ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Instead, I funneled the resources through a local nonprofit I'd supported for years, under the radar, trusting that the right people would know how to cultivate change. I imagined the small business owners now planting seedlings in their plots, students gathering around benches carved by a local carpenter I commissioned, families learning to grow their own fresh produce. This is the tangible return on an act born from humiliation but matured into regeneration. I inhale deeply, inhaling the damp earth and faint scent of basil. My phone buzzes in my pocket. Aida's morning update. All assets fully reallocated. Community fund operational. Board review scheduled next week. I smile to myself. The ordeal with Marla's bank feels distant now, a necessary catalyst rather than the destination. The money served its purpose. It reclaimed my dignity, held her accountable, and then transformed into something far greater than vengeance could achieve. As the first rays of sun gild the treetops, I hear footsteps behind me. Jonah emerges from the tool shed, carrying a wheelbarrow loaded with compost. He wipes sweat and soil from his brow and offers me a grin. "Morning, boss," he jokes, though the title feels odd on his lips. I chuckle, stepping aside to let him roll the wheelbarrow past. "Everything looking good?" I ask, watching him spread rich, dark compost over a new planting bed. He nods, teeth flashing. "We've got volunteers arriving soon, kids from the after-school program, a couple of retirees, and get this, a small troupe of local chefs who want to start a pick-and-cook weekend event." He pauses, eyes bright. This place is going to become the heart of the neighborhood. I feel a swell of satisfaction. That was the plan all along, I say softly, thinking of the afternoons I spent poring over spreadsheets, vetting nonprofit partners, and mapping out phase 2 of development. It's not enough to just plant seeds. You need to build community around them. He brushes soil off his hands and extends a fist for me to bump. You did that. And then some. We stand together in companionable silence, the garden awakening around us as the city stirs beyond the fence. A lone songbird trills atop a nearby oak, and I close my eyes for a moment, letting the melody ground me. In the stillness, I recognize how far I've come. From the man strolling into his ex-wife's bank clutching a request for $150, to the silent architect of an institution that now uplifts hundreds of residents. Jonah nudges me gently. "You hungry?" he asks. "Coffee and breakfast burritos by the community center?" I nod, brushing the sleeve of my jacket. Sounds perfect. As we walk toward the small pavilion where the morning meal awaits, I glance back at the plaque one last time. Quiet growth, an apt tribute to a journey defined not by spectacle, but by steadfast resolve. I had few allies in those early days, just a friend who believed in me, and a vision of what could be built when respect and investment intersected. Approaching the pavilion, I see neighbors gathering, laughing children with small shovels, elders chatting beside raised beds, volunteers unloading trays of burritos. Their smiles greet me like old friends welcoming me home. For a moment, I allow myself to be that man. Not the wielding power broker Kay Dorn, nor the humiliated ex-husband Silas Donnelly, but simply Silas, garden steward, friend, community builder. I raise my hand in greeting, and a ripple of waves returns my gesture. Jonah hands me a steaming cup of coffee, and we settle onto a bench together. Around us, conversations bloom, plans for next week's harvest festival, requests for more herb seedlings, offers to teach free gardening workshops. The air hums with shared purpose. I take a sip of coffee, its warmth spreading through me like affirmation. The plaque's words echo in my mind, quiet growth. True power, I realize, lies not in orchestrating someone's downfall, but in reinvesting that energy into something enduring, where respect earns interest daily, and every seed sown returns a harvest of hope. Here, in the dawn light, I close my eyes and whisper a silent toast to possibility, resilience, and the simple, unbreakable truth that a life reinvested is the ultimate victory.